You know that feeling when you're ripped from a deep sleep, not by a nightmare, but by a sound that's so out of place, so utterly wrong that your brain just short-circuits for a second. That was me last Tuesday. One second I'm dead to the world, and the next I'm bolt upright in bed, heart hammering against my ribs like it's trying to escape. My bedside clock glows a sickly green, 2:13 a.m. And then I hear it again: knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp, deliberate raps on my apartment door. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, frozen, barely breathing, just listening. The silence was almost worse than the knocking. It was heavy, expectant. Every creak of the old building settling, every distant city noise sounded amplified, menacing. My mind raced, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Drunk neighbor, lost delivery person from some 24-hour service I didn't know existed. But 2:13 a.m. on a Tuesday, and on the 10th floor. I must have stood there staring through that peephole for a good 5 minutes, waiting for something, anything to happen. A flicker of movement, a shadow, a sound. But there was nothing. The hallway remained stubbornly, unnervingly empty. Eventually, the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a confusing mix of relief and unease. Had I imagined it? Was I so stressed from work that my mind was playing tricks on me? The next day, I was a wreck. Groggy, on edge, jumping at every sudden noise. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I'd had a vivid auditory hallucination. But as evening approached, a knot of anxiety began to tighten in my stomach. What if it happened again? I found myself glancing at the clock more and more often as the night wore on. I tried to distract myself, watched a movie, read a book, but the back of my mind was always listening, waiting. This time I didn't hesitate for long. The fear was still there, a cold fist clenched in my gut, but it was mingled with a desperate need to understand, to see, to confront whatever this was. Or at least see nothing again and try to convince myself I was going crazy in a very specific way. I slid out of bed, faster this time, my bare feet hitting the floor with more urgency. I didn't bother trying to be quiet. Adrenaline was thrumming through me too loudly for stealth. The third night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat on the sofa in my living room, wrapped in a blanket, a heavy Maglite flashlight clutched in my hand, staring at the front door. Every tick of the clock on the wall felt like a countdown. The city noises outside, the distant sirens, the rumble of late-night trucks, usually comforting, now sounded like a soundtrack to my growing paranoia. 2:00 a.m. 2:10 a.m. My palms were sweating. I kept rehearsing what I'd do, what I'd say. It was after the 5th or 6th night of this torment, I was losing count, losing my grip, that I started noticing other things. Small things. Things so minor that on their own I would have dismissed them. But combined with the nightly knocking, they took on a sinister significance. One morning, after another sleepless night punctuated by those 3 damned knocks, I stumbled into the kitchen to make coffee, my head throbbing. And I saw it. The knocking itself began to change, or maybe it was just my perception, warped by fear and lack of sleep. It still came at 2:13 a.m., still 3 distinct raps, but they sounded different, fuller somehow, more resonant, as if whatever was making the sound was pressing harder against the door, or maybe closer. That was the thought that really terrified me. What if it wasn't just at the door anymore? I couldn't take it anymore. The isolation was crushing me. I had to know if anyone else was experiencing anything even remotely similar. The next morning, fueled by a potent cocktail of caffeine and desperation, I decided to talk to my neighbors. Mrs. Henderson lived in 10B, the apartment next to mine. She was an elderly woman, lived alone, mostly kept to herself. I knocked on her door, feeling incredibly awkward. Mrs. Henderson. The failed attempts to corroborate my experiences with the neighbors sent me spiraling further into doubt and fear. Was this all in my head? Was I cracking under some unspoken pressure, my mind manufacturing this nightly torment? The thought was almost as terrifying as the idea of a supernatural entity. If it was me, if I was the source of my own terror, then where could I possibly run? How could I escape myself? I started to question every perception, every memory. In a desperate bid for some kind of objective proof, I decided to try and record it. If I could just capture the sound, then I'd know. I'd have evidence. Maybe it would sound different on a recording, less personal. I set up my smartphone on a small tripod I had for photography, positioning it in the living room, aimed directly at the front door. With no physical evidence and no one to corroborate my story, I turned to the one place where every weird, unexplained phenomenon eventually finds a voice: the internet. I spent hours, night after night, hunched over my laptop, typing in every conceivable search term. Knocking at door, no one there. Phantom knocks at 2 a.m. Ghostly knocking sounds. Meaning of 3 knocks. It had been about 2 weeks since the knocking started. 2 weeks of sleepless nights, of gnawing anxiety, of my sanity fraying at the edges. I was in a perpetual state of high alert. I developed a routine: brace for 2:13 a.m., hear the knocks on the front door, lie there rigid with fear, wait for the faint whisper that sometimes followed, and then spend the rest of the pre-dawn hours staring at the ceiling. But then, one night, something changed. My mind reeled. How could it be at my bedroom door? I lived alone. All the doors and windows were locked. I checked them religiously every night. There was no way anyone could have gotten in, unless it wasn't a someone in the conventional sense. The silence after those 3 knocks on my bedroom door was the most terrifying silence I had ever experienced. It was thick, suffocating, charged with an unbearable tension. With a strangled gasp, I finally found the switch and flicked on the lamp. The sudden yellow light flooded my small bedroom, chasing the deepest shadows into the corners. I blinked against the brightness, my eyes darting instantly to the door. Nothing. It was closed, just my ordinary, unassuming bedroom door. For a wild, hopeful second, I thought maybe, just maybe, the sound had come from somewhere else, that my fear-addled brain had misinterpreted it. But I knew where those knocks had come from. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. How could I? I sat on my bed, lamp on, book still clutched in my lap, jumping at every tiny sound. The sun eventually rose, painting the sky in hues of gray and orange, but it brought no comfort, no sense of safety. The light felt like a flimsy defense against something that operated in the shadows of my own mind, and apparently my own home. The discovery of the scratches shifted something in me. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but now it was mixed with a strange, almost obsessive curiosity. The knocks, the whispers, the moved objects, and now these marks. It felt like a deliberate, escalating pattern of communication, albeit a terrifying one. I started to think about the knocks themselves. 3 distinct raps, always 3, 2:13 a.m., that time. Why that specific time? One night, about 3 weeks into this nightmare, I decided to try something different. Something that went against every instinct I had. I decided not to react. I wouldn't get out of bed. I wouldn't go to the door. I wouldn't even acknowledge the knocks when they came. Maybe, I thought, if I showed no fear, no response, it would get bored, go away. It was a flimsy hope, but I was out of other ideas. The next morning, after that terrible scraping sound, I approached the front door with a new kind of dread. I knelt down, examining the area where I'd heard the scraping, where the first scratch mark had appeared. I ran my fingers over the paint, looking for new marks, anything. And then I saw it. It wasn't a scratch this time. It was more subtle. The wood of the door, right near the bottom edge, looked almost thinner, as if it had been worn away ever so slightly from the inside. I stumbled back from the door, a choked gasp escaping my lips. My own front door. The barrier I thought was protecting me was actually the cage for whatever this was. All those nights, the knocking wasn't at me. It was a desperate, infinitesimal chipping away, a slow, patient escape attempt. Each knock wasn't just a sound, it was a tiny displacement of wood, a microscopic step towards freedom. The 2:13 a.m. Was it the only time it had enough energy? You know how some silences are peaceful, and others, well, others just scream that something's wrong. This was the screaming kind, the type that crawls under your skin and makes the tiny hairs on your arms stand up. I woke up, not sure why at first, just snapped awake in the dead of night, 3:17 a.m., blinking accusingly from my bedside clock. The first thing I noticed wasn't the dark, or the stale taste in my mouth, or even the weird, oppressive weight in the air. It was Buster. I strained my ears, holding my breath, trying to catch any sound, any indication that Buster was okay, that maybe he was just in a deep sleep. But the silence persisted, thick and suffocating, like a heavy blanket pressed over the entire house. It wasn't just quiet, it was an unnatural quiet. You know how a house has its own little symphony of noises? The hum of the fridge, the creak of settling floorboards, the distant sigh of the wind outside. All of that was gone, or maybe just swallowed by this. My feet touched the cold wooden floor, and I swear, the sound of my own bare soles on the planks was like thunderclaps in the oppressive silence. I didn't dare turn on a light, not yet. Some primal instinct told me that light might attract. Whatever it was. I moved slowly, one deliberate step at a time, out of the bedroom and into the hallway. The air out here felt even colder, and the silence was, if possible, deeper, more absolute. I made it to the top of the stairs, peering down into the inky blackness of the living room. This was where Buster usually slept, on his big comfy bed by the fireplace. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Buster," I called again, a little louder this time, trying to inject some confidence I didn't feel into my voice. And then I saw him, or at least his silhouette. He was there by the fireplace, but not on his bed. He was standing, stock still, rigid. I crept down the stairs, each tread groaning under my weight, sounds that would normally have Buster up and wagging his tail, or at least looking over. But he didn't move. Not an inch. As I got closer, I could see him more clearly. His fur, usually so soft and golden, seemed to be bristling along his spine, though not in an aggressive way, more like sheer, unadulterated terror. His body was locked, muscles bunched, and his head was fixed on that damn corner. I slowly turned my gaze from Buster to the corner he was so transfixed by. My heart was pounding, a frantic rhythm against the suffocating silence of the house. The corner was deep in shadow, the moonlight barely penetrating its depths. At first it just looked like, well, a corner, empty, dusty, cobwebs clinging to the junction of the walls and ceiling. I squinted, trying to make out any detail, anything that could explain Buster's terrifying fixation. Was there a spider, a mouse? My hand fumbled for the switch of the nearby table lamp, the old brass one we rarely used. My fingers were clumsy, slick with a cold sweat I hadn't realized was there. With a click, a dim, yellowish light flooded that section of the room, pushing back the oppressive shadows. I blinked against the sudden illumination, my eyes scanning the corner. It was empty. Completely, utterly empty. Just faded wallpaper, a dusty skirting board, a stray cobweb I'd missed during my last cleaning spree. Nothing. I stood there, torn between the mundane reality of the lit corner and the undeniable, palpable terror emanating from my dog. My rational mind was screaming that there was nothing there, that Buster was sick or having some kind of seizure. But my gut, that primal part of me that had been on high alert since I woke up, knew better. The air around that corner, even with the lamp on, still felt wrong. I cautiously extended my hand towards it, not too close, just enough to feel. "Okay, boy, that's enough," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I couldn't just leave him like this, staring into nothing, vibrating with terror. I reached down, intending to gently pull him away to break his fixation. My hands closed around his collar and I gave a soft tug. He didn't budge. It was like trying to move a statue carved from stone and ice. He was completely rigid, his muscles locked tight. I pulled a little harder. "Come on, Buster. Let's go. There's nothing there." Giving up on moving Buster for a moment, a new urgency gripped me. If there was something in the house, something that could terrify my dog this badly, I needed to know how it got in, or if it was still contained. I left Buster by the corner. He didn't seem capable of moving anyway, and started a frantic check of the downstairs. The front door, locked, deadbolted. The back door, same, chain still on. I moved from window to window in the living room, then the dining room, the kitchen. I returned to the living room, my search yielding nothing but more questions and a deeper sense of unease. Buster was still in the exact same spot, a furry, terrified statue. As I got closer to him in that damned corner, I noticed it, a smell. It was faint, so faint I'd missed it before, masked by the usual household scents and my own adrenaline. But now, in the relatively still air, it was there. It was sweet, cloyingly sweet. Just as I was trying to process the bizarre smell, trying to steel myself to investigate the corner more closely despite every instinct screaming at me to run, Buster made a sound. It wasn't the low hum or the suppressed growl. It was a yelp. A single, sharp, choked-off yelp, filled with an agony and terror that lanced straight through my heart. It was the sound of an animal in extreme distress. Then silence again. But this silence was different. As I knelt there trying to comfort Buster, who was now just a trembling, whimpering mess, the feeling of being watched intensified tenfold. It was no longer a vague unease. It was a direct, focused pressure, like a physical weight pressing down on me. And it was coming from that corner, undeniably. Even with the lamp on, even with nothing visible to my eyes, I knew something was there, staring at us. It was a malevolent presence, cold and calculating. I couldn't stay there, paralyzed by fear, waiting for whatever it was to make its next move. My protective instincts, both for Buster and myself, finally kicked in, overriding the terror. I had to do something. Scrabbling in my pocket, my fingers closed around my phone. I pulled it out, my thumb hovering over the emergency call button, but then I hesitated. What would I say? Hello, police. My dog is scared of a corner and it smells weird. They'd think I was crazy. I flicked the switch on the flashlight. A powerful beam of white light cut through the dimness of the living room, far brighter than the weak glow of the table lamp. I aimed it directly into the heart of that damned corner, sweeping the beam up and down, side to side, determined to expose whatever lurked there. For a heart-stopping moment, there was nothing. Just the faded wallpaper, the dusty skirting board, the cobwebs illuminated in stark, unflattering detail. My breath caught in my throat. Was I wrong? My hand holding the flashlight was shaking uncontrollably now, making the beam jitter across the distortion. As the light moved, the thing seemed to react. It didn't move in a conventional sense, but the area of warped light seemed to contract, to recoil slightly from the brightest part of the beam, as if the intense light was uncomfortable or perhaps even painful to it. It was a subtle shift, but definite. It knew I could see it, or at least perceive its presence. I wanted to scream, to run, to just close my eyes and make it go away. But I was frozen, mesmerized by the sheer impossibility of what I was witnessing. And then, for a terrifying, heart-stopping fraction of a second, the distortion changed. It was as if it tried to coalesce, to take on a more definite form in response to my continued scrutiny, or perhaps in defiance of the light. The vague, shimmering outline seemed to solidify. That momentary solidification, that glimpse of its true form, shattered whatever courage I had left. I wasn't fighting a draft or a bad smell anymore. I was in the presence of a monster. Pure primal instinct took over. Buster, I choked out, my voice hoarse. I stumbled backwards, never taking my eyes or the flashlight beam off that corner. The entity remained a shimmering distortion, but I could feel its focus, its cold, alien attention burning into me. We spent the rest of the night huddled in my bedroom, me and Buster. I dragged a heavy dresser in front of the door, a pathetic and likely useless barricade. Buster lay pressed against me on the bed, shivering constantly, his breathing shallow and rapid. I kept the bedroom light on, a small defiance against the oppressive darkness that had consumed the rest of the house. I didn't sleep, not for a second. I spent the morning trying to rationalize, trying to find any explanation other than the impossible truth. Gas leak, mass hallucination, but nothing fit. And then there was Buster. He slowly started to come around, the trembling eased, he even drank some water. But he wasn't the same. He stuck to my side like glue, constantly looking towards the living room, towards that corner with wide, haunted eyes. It started with the breathing, not mine. I'd wake up, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and just listen. It was always the same, slow, impossibly raspy, like sandpaper over old leather. And the worst part, it always seemed to be coming from right outside my bedroom door in the narrow, dark hallway. The first few times, maybe the first week, I told myself it was just the old house settling, you know. I started sleeping with a baseball bat beside my bed. Pathetic, right? Like that would do anything against something I couldn't even see. But it was something, a small comfort. One night, about 2 weeks into this nightmare, the breathing was different. It was closer. So much closer that the fine hairs on my arms stood on end, a primal instinct screaming at me. I didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. My own breath was caught in my throat, a painful knot. The next morning, sunlight felt like a damn miracle. I practically leaped out of bed, baseball bat still clutched in my sweaty hand, and flung the bedroom door open. The hallway was empty, silent. Just the usual dust motes dancing in the sunbeams slicing through the grimy window at the far end. I checked the doorframe, my heart still thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Nothing. No scratches, no marks, no sign that anything had been there at all. I started leaving the hallway light on all night, hoping it would deter. Whatever it was, it didn't. The breathing continued, punctual as ever, just as the last vestiges of twilight faded from the sky. If anything, the light seemed to make it worse, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on my eyes. I'd see movement out of the corner of my vision, fleeting and indistinct, gone when I turned to look. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know, or at least try to see. Armed with my trusty baseball bat and a heavy-duty flashlight, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. The breathing outside my door was a low, steady rumble now, like a sleeping beast. The occasional soft thump still echoed down the hall. I counted to 3, then with a surge of desperate courage, I wrenched the door open and shone the flashlight beam into the hallway. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. After that night, things got weirder. The breathing didn't stop, but it became less predictable. Sometimes it would be there, sometimes not. It was the other things that started to ramp up. Small things at first. I'd come home from work to find objects in my living room slightly out of place. A book pulled halfway from the shelf, a coaster moved a few inches on the coffee table, a picture frame on the mantelpiece tilted at an odd angle. Trivial stuff, easily dismissed. Then came the cold spots. Not just a draft, but pockets of intense, unnatural cold that would spring up in random places around the house. I'd be walking from the living room to the kitchen and suddenly pass through an area so frigid it would make me gasp, goosebumps erupting all over my skin. It was like stepping into a walk-in freezer for a split second, then back into the normal temperature of the room. There was no pattern to them, no discernible source. I started to notice a smell. It was faint at first, barely perceptible, like damp earth after a heavy rain mixed with something else. Something vaguely metallic and sickly sweet, like overripe fruit on the verge of rot. It would come and go, usually strongest in the hallway outside my bedroom, or near those damn cold spots. I aired out the house constantly, burning incense, using air fresheners, but nothing could completely mask it. The whispers started not long after I found the stain. At first, I thought it was my imagination, my sleep-deprived brain playing tricks on me. Just faint murmurs like a television on in another room, too low to make out any actual words. But they grew more distinct, more insistent. They were always just at the edge of hearing, sibilant and soft, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Sleep deprivation was taking its toll. I was a wreck. I couldn't focus at work. I was irritable, jumpy. My colleagues started asking if I was okay, commenting on my pale face and the dark circles under my eyes. I just mumbled something about a bad flu. How could I tell them I was being haunted by phantom breathing and insidious whispers? They'd think I was insane. Maybe I was. The nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, rigid with an awful anticipation, waiting for the first sign, the first sound. The encounter, if you could call it that, with the shadow figure changed something. The breathing became more guttural, more aggressive. The whispers grew louder, and sometimes I thought I could almost make out a word, a name, my name. Mahark, drawn out raspy, like it was being exhaled with great effort. It chilled me to the bone. I started barricading my bedroom door at night. I pushed my heavy dresser in front of it, a solid oak piece that took all my strength to move. I had to do something. I couldn't live like this. I started researching the history of the house online, late at night, hunched over my laptop, the only light coming from the screen. The local library archives, old newspaper clippings, anything I could find. The house was built in 1938 by a family named Blackwood. They'd lived here for about 20 years, then sold it. Nothing unusual there. Knowing about Alistair Finch didn't make things better. If anything, it made them worse. The activity in the house ramped up as if my knowledge had somehow provoked it. The scratching at my bedroom door became more violent, accompanied by low, frustrated groans. The cold spots were larger, more frequent, and the smell of decay was almost unbearable at times. I started feeling drained. Not just tired from lack of sleep, but physically weak, like something was leaching my energy. I was losing weight rapidly. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, gaunt, hollow-eyed, with a perpetual tremor in my hands. The house felt like it was consuming me bit by bit. One afternoon, I came home from a particularly grueling and unproductive day at work, feeling more defeated than ever. As I walked into the living room, I noticed something on the floor, right in the center of the room. It was a small, antique silver locket, tarnished with age. I'd never seen it before. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The breathing was right behind me, a chilling caress of cold air on my neck, carrying that awful, sweet, decaying scent. I could hear the wetness in it, the rasp, as if the lungs that produced it were filled with grave dirt. My entire body was rigid with terror. The locket felt like it was burning a hole in my palm. "Alistair," I whispered, my voice barely audible, cracking. "Is this yours?" The breathing hitched, then resumed, a little faster, a little closer. That night, I didn't barricade the door. I don't know why. Maybe it was a sense of fatalism, maybe a desperate hope that direct confrontation, or at least openness, was the only way. I left the locket on my nightstand next to the baseball bat, which now seemed utterly useless. I lay in bed, stiff as a board, waiting. The usual preliminaries began, the cold seeping into the room, the faint, earthy smell, and then the breathing. It started in the hallway, but it didn't stay there. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, the unseen weight on my bed, the cold, raspy breathing washing over me. My eyes were screwed shut so tight I saw stars. I was waiting for a touch, a voice, something to happen. The silence, apart from that awful breathing, was deafening. Then slowly, tentatively, I felt something brush against my hand, the one that was lying outside the covers. It wasn't a human touch. It was dry, papery, and incredibly cold, like old parchment or dead leaves. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of that touch. It was like a phantom sensation, my skin still crawling where it had made contact. I felt contaminated. I decided I had to leave. I couldn't stay in that house another night. I started packing a bag, just essentials, my hands still trembling. As I was throwing clothes haphazardly into a duffel, I noticed the locket on the nightstand. I hesitated. Should I take it? Leave it? Destroy it? Soon, the word echoed in my mind, a death knell. The breathing was everywhere, a chorus of raspy exhalations pressing in on me. The room felt like it was shrinking. Panic, raw and absolute, clawed its way up my throat. I dropped the locket, grabbed my bag, and ran. I didn't bother with the dresser. I just bolted out of the bedroom, down the stairs, not daring to look back, not daring to stop. The sounds followed me, the breathing, the whispers, a cacophony of ghostly pursuit. It's been a month now. I'm staying with my brother, hundreds of miles away from that accursed house. I haven't heard the breathing, haven't smelled that awful, sweet decay. I sleep with the lights on, of course, and I still jump at every unexpected sound, but the immediate terror has dulled, or so I thought. This morning, I was getting ready for work. My brother got me a temporary job, trying to get me back on my feet. I was in the bathroom, shaving.